Hey, it's Alan. I get asked all the time, how exactly does Kadima help people? There are three primary ways. One, we provide one-on-one personalized career coaching with a focus on getting you a great job. Two, we provide an online do-it-yourself course where you can work at your own pace. Three, if you have a job offer, we'll help you negotiate for more. So to find out about these great services and everything else that we offer at Kadima, sign up for our newsletter. Go to syckpodcast.com. That's SYCK podcast.com. I promise you, it'll be the best newsletter to accelerate your career. Thanks a lot.
Live from Brooklyn, welcome to the Sick Podcast, starring Alan Stein, where he steers your career with Kadima. Along with Alan, I'm Russ Reba, and it seems that you may need to cover your kids' ears for this episode, as I hear that Alan's guest today has a little bit of a potty mouth, and today we have an interview with an interviewer. She does so much more than that as well. Her name is Aline Lerner, and she's going to join Alan after Alan lets us in with a quick story of what's happening with him outside of the workplace. You know, we have sons that are the same age, and we're constantly talking about their adventures. And I think I got an email from your daughter saying, how come you and my dad never talk about me? We can't leave your daughter out of this one.
Well, Russ, A, I know you're lying because she doesn't use email despite all the emails that I send her. But B, yes, I do need to be updating the sick audience here a little bit about what Jasmine's up to. So she is, unlike my boys who are in 11th grade, who are taking the SATs and taking their driver's license, Jasmine is knee-deep in sports, and she's playing soccer.
Nice.
In Brooklyn in the parade grounds where Willie Randolph used to play baseball way back. And she's also on the varsity volleyball team at her high school. So very nice. Partially because she's athletic, and partially because they needed every girl to play on the team to get a full lineup. But we'll pretend it's all because of her
athleticism,
her Stein athletic ability. Yes.
So correct me if I'm wrong. Does she also know how to navigate a boat pretty well?
She did. Yes, that's a great point. She did get her boat license this summer.
Very nice.
So she does have the boat license. That you only need to be 14, apparently, to get a boat license. So she has her boat license. And now she is putting that on rest as we move back to Brooklyn and don't have access to my father-in-law's boat. Okay. But she is focusing on her soccer and volleyball skills and occasionally getting to school on time for her studies.
And I should say she probably did not fail the parallel parking portion of the boat test.
She did not that I'm aware of, but that my father-in-law was the judge of that one.
All right. So you want an insider's view when it comes to interviewing in tech? Let's get into it with Aline Lerner right here on the Sick Career Podcast.
I'm really excited to have Aline Lerner on the podcast today, and I just found out that she has a potty mouth. So this may not be suitable for all audiences here as we...
Apologies in advance.
As we dig in there. But I met Aline through a mutual friend that we have, someone that just a mutual friend. We got put in contact with each other because we're both in the recruiting space, and we both have some pretty interesting opinions on what's worked in the past, what hasn't worked, and how to improve it. So I'll hand it over to you and just introduce yourself to the sick audience out there.
All right. Well, first off, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. My name's Aline. I did a lot of stuff in my career. Right now, I run a company called Interviewing.io. We help people practice for technical interviews and then also help them find jobs. It's specifically for software engineers. Before that, I worked as a recruiter for many years. And before that, I worked as a software engineer. And then even before that, I spent a few years cooking professionally. So done a lot of disparate things, but for the last decade or so, my life has really become increasingly about trying to make hiring efficient and fair.
That's great to hear. And I'm assuming when you were in the space, if hiring was efficient and was fair, you would not have started this business. So I'd love to hear some of those inefficiencies and unfairness that you saw in the space, either as a candidate or as an interviewer.
Yeah, well, I have had the good fortune and sometimes I suppose misfortune of being on all sides of the table. So I've been a candidate, I've been a hiring manager, I've been an interviewer, I've been an in-house recruiter, I've been an agency recruiter, and now I'm a person that runs a marketplace that does recruiting. So I have done it all. The inefficiencies and unfairnesses that I've observed, I think really boil down to two things. So the first one is that even though we all know that a resume does not tell you whether somebody is good at their job, in the absence of something else, companies still really heavily rely on resumes to decide who gets to interview. And it sucks because, companies pay lip service to this idea of fairness and removing bias. And many will even say resumes suck. But then it's like, well, how do you hire? Well, of course we use resumes, right? So that's one thing. And I think, we've all worked with engineers, and I'll be talking about engineers specifically because that's just where I've been living for so long, but probably true in other disciplines as well. We've all worked with engineers who don't look good on paper and are amazing at their jobs. And I've worked with many people like that, and that's what kind of got me frustrated in the first place. I'm like, this person would never have gotten a job at this company if they hadn't been referred in by their high school friend, or really vouched for, something like that. And that's not right. And everybody knows so many people like this, but the status quo persists. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that despite how much of a perceived shortage there is of good engineers, it is so difficult for a candidate and a hiring manager to connect at the right time. So let's say you're an engineer. Let's even say that your resume is impeccable. Maybe you went to Stanford and you worked at Google, right? Let's say that you decided that you're now on the market. What do? Well, you probably go and look at your LinkedIn, and your LinkedIn is going to be full of recruiter outreach. You're probably getting, dozens of messages a day, and that's going to go back years. So you have that. And then, maybe one of those companies is exciting to you, maybe not. But let's say you reach out and guess what? That recruiter no longer works there because recruiters leave their job every, 3 to 6 months because most of them are contractors. And there's a law that says if you employ them for longer than 6 months, you have to make them full time. So then they get fired. The whole thing's fucked up, but that's a conversation for another day. So that recruiter is no longer there. Okay. So then maybe you're like, well, I'm really interested in Acme Corp. Do I apply online? Well, I might, but nobody's looking there. I'm never going to hear back. It's like screaming into a black hole. Okay, well, I guess let's see if I know anybody there. Okay, my girlfriend's brother's cousin, works there. I guess, maybe he can refer me. And, then you end up getting reached out to by somebody else and you're like, well, fuck all that. I'm just going to go with the outreach because I don't feel like doing the work, even though I was really interested in Acme Corp. And that's the journey for people that look great on paper. If you don't look great on paper, what are you going to do? Nobody's going to take you seriously. And in the meantime, right, companies are left and right doing the spray and pray approach where their recruiters are contacting every engineer who ever worked at Google or Meta. And those people either aren't looking right now or aren't interested in you. And it's such a struggle. And that's why hiring is inefficient, right? It takes, 250 staff hours to actually make a single engineering hire. Isn't that crazy?
Wow.
Yeah. And something 75 to 90 days. And in the meantime, there are all these people looking and all of these companies trying to hire them, and they just can't meet each other.
So you mentioned a couple of times about the power of referrals. And you also mentioned that there were people that you've worked with that were good. And you were like, they would have never got hired. And I'm guessing they might have also came in through a referral or some other way. Yep. But talk about the power of referrals of if you have the same exact candidate, a good resume, bad resume, or good versus good, bad versus bad, and then you have a referral versus non-referral. How important is the power of a referral?
Mm-hmm. Well, I will answer your question in a moment, but I will preface my answer with the fact that the fact that referrals have so much power, I think just perpetuates the problem, right? I hate it. This is why Interviewing IO exists. So referrals will absolutely get you in the door. Well, that's not actually true. At smaller companies, referrals will get you in the door. At larger companies, if you're a junior engineer, right? It's actually really hard for senior people to refer you. So I think, without naming names, I just have a little bit of insight into these companies' processes, but there's an idea of something called a referral, and then there's something called a lead. And they're actually very different. And for many of these companies, if you're junior, even if somebody refers you, you just get put in the lead bucket. And the lead is like, hey, maybe we'll reach out to this person at some point. A referral carries a lot of weight, but how much weight they carry is a function of how in demand a given role actually is. But at smaller companies, referrals actually do mean a lot. And I don't want to, completely dispel this idea that referrals are good. They can be. It's just that they're not magic. I would say that if you're trying to get into one of these big companies, you just have to cast a really wide net and bang on a lot of doors and end up on a lot of different lead lists. And eventually you will get in, but it's a slog, and right. It's increasingly unfair.
So, right. It is unfair. Referrals do work, though.
They do help, though. They do. They're way better than, trying to apply online or something like that.
In my case, over my career, I've had 29 jobs. 24 out of those 29 jobs have come through referrals or through network. So referrals exist. How is Interviewing IO trying to level that? Or if at all, how are you trying to approach that big imbalance of if you have a referral, you get a tenfold boost or whatever of being.
Yeah. So here's how Interviewing IO works. It's kind of a two-stage process. First, we're a practice platform. So any software engineer can get on Interviewing IO and get anonymous mock interviews with senior engineers from FANG and FANG adjacent companies. So, you get on, you can book somebody for tomorrow. They will run you through a very realistic and rigorous algorithmic or systems design or, whatever it is you want interview, and give you actionable feedback at the end. So you do a few of these, and we're actually storing all of that feedback and aggregating it. And once you start doing well in practice, our system will flag you as a top performer. And we don't care who you are, right? We don't have your resume. All we know is your interview. If you do well in practice and you're one of these top performers, then you get access to our jobs portal. And in that portal, instead of having to apply or do anything, right, you can just get fast-tracked right to a real technical interview. So Amazon is one of our customers. If you want to interview with Amazon, once you've done well in our practice interviews, with 2 clicks, you can book a technical interview with an Amazon engineer, again, as early as tomorrow. And that interview is still anonymous. So Amazon is now interviewing you. They don't know who you are. All they know is that you're a top performer. At the end of that interview, if things go well, you unmask and you go straight to an onsite.
How do you mask that? Is it like a homework assignment or something?
No, it's all interviews. Everything is with a human. So your practice interviews are,
the video is off and
there's no video. It's just audio.
But so you can still hear a sound. So you can still hear accent. You can still hear
you can hear accent and gender. We actually have 2 patents on real-time voice masking. So we can make women sound like men and men sound like women, or just make everybody sound like in this, uncanny valley gender neutral way. We actually tested that because we thought that was the best way, and it freaked people out. So we're like, okay, I guess, we'll make everybody sound like a man, because the lower pitch voices with modulation just sounded a little
that's
cleaner.
fine. Men have better chances of getting the job. So you might as well raise the odds of everybody.
So we do have that. Most of our employers don't choose to use it because it does degrade the sound quality a little bit, totally. And we should put more work into it. But you can hear you can intuit in most cases the person's gender. Certainly you can hear an accent. But in my experience, if I'm honest, people talk about unconscious bias, right? But I think one of the biggest problems is conscious bias, where it's not, I'm unconsciously racist or sexist. It's, I will not talk to somebody who didn't go to one of these schools. And that's a decision that you're making. And in many places, that is actually codified, where the recruiting team will have a list of acceptable schools.
So you don't show them anything about the candidate. You're just nothing. This is Joe Smith or...
Yeah. Or, we have pseudonyms. So this is Blue Llama.
Right.
Blue Llama meet nefarious dinosaur. Okay, have a great interview.
So that's interesting. And this is just the first round of interview?
Yeah, so a typical process end to end for a software engineer looks like this. This is without us. This is just the vanilla process. So resume screen, followed by a recruiter call, followed by a technical phone interview, followed by these days a virtual on-site. Our process is, let's cut the top of that, start with a technical phone screen. If that goes well, move straight on.
Okay.
Then the way these interviews work is there's no video, there's audio, and you're in a coding environment together, writing code or drawing stuff or whatever it is.
And Amazon is like you mentioned, Amazon's one of your clients. They're comfortable, like evolving their hiring practice for this.
They are, and it's a testament to them. We have a number of other great companies we work with. Dropbox is another, and the reason they're doing this, I think, employers want to do the right thing, right? And I admire when they actually take the plunge, because our pitch to them is, hey, talk to randos on the internet. We promise you they're good. Like, that's basically our pitch. And, when we first started, we were met with a lot of healthy skepticism for good reason. But the way we typically start working with employers is we say, look, we'll just give you a free pilot. Like, talk to 4 or 6 of our candidates and see how they convert. At worst, you lose, 4 engineering hours. You're already losing way more than that, like interviewing the wrong people in your own process. So it's like, okay, cool. And then once they do, they're like, whoa, this converts way better than other channels. And the reason it works is not rocket science. We have mountains of interview data, and that lets us predict pretty well how people are going to do in phone screens. I mean, our candidates convert about 3 times better than other sources, including internal referrals, actually. We're converting better because we have that data. And once companies see that, they get on board because they like the idea that these are anonymous, right? They like the idea that they get to remove some of the bias from the process. And they like that doing the right thing is also more cost effective and more efficient.
So in the masking part, you do the masking at the technical screen, and then they get unmasked for the full panel or the full loop.
Yes. That's right.
So have you looked at the rate of people going from the technical to the unmasking?
Mm-hmm.
And because that should be totally unbiased. Like, they have no idea of gender, and
well, they do know gender from the voice in most cases.
But they don't know what schools they went to. They don't know what companies they worked at. Mm-hmm. And then after that, it's unmasked. And do they look at the resume, or can they look at LinkedIn? So at that point, there's other things that come in there. So have you seen a difference of getting from the technical screen to the loops versus the loops to an offer?
Mm-hmm. So,
because the loops to the offer, there's a lot more potential for
bias,
unconscious or unconscious bias.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So from the technical phone screen to onsite, we convert about 70% of our candidates pass. And in a good sort of rigorous funnel, that is like 20 or 25%. So,
but do you see do you see any
the
differences
composition,
over gender or race?
The composition, we haven't done a great job of tracking gender or race in our platform because it is anonymous, but we do track whether candidates are like traditional or non-traditional. So what's crazy is about 40%, we'll never know. It's not a controlled experiment. It's not like the company interviews the candidate in their normal process and then interviews them with us, and then in one they pass and they fail. It's kind of one or the other, but we can make some inferences. So over our lifetime, about 40% of the hires that we've made have been people from non-traditional backgrounds, meaning they don't look good on paper. And, if you look at a normal funnel, right, what is that? I don't know, less than 10. So I think that we are making an impact, but there are some cases where a candidate applied to a company, right, got rejected based on their resume, and then got on Interviewing IO. We have a relationship with that same company. And then they got a chance to interview anonymously and not only passed, but ended up getting an offer. There was a case, and I won't name the company, where a candidate actually got rejected 3 times before he ever got to speak with a human, and then got hired when he went in through us. So I do think we're making a sizable difference. We even have a clause in our contract that says, if we surface a candidate that's previously applied to you, now if they've already interviewed, that's on us, our bad. We're wasting your time if they failed. But if you haven't actually talked to them and you rejected them based on their resume and we surfaced them, we actually added a bunch of value, and you have to acknowledge that. And they do. We have had cases where, some employers have interviewed a candidate anonymously. The candidate has unmasked, and then they looked at their resume or their LinkedIn, right? And they're like, whoa, like, this is not, we wanted non-traditional, but not this non-traditional. And it's like, okay, you can't do that. And we've actually had to fire some of our customers for doing this consistently, where they're like, this candidate has to have a CS degree. And we're like, if you enforce that, we're not going to work with you because that is anathema to what we do.
That's really interesting. And when these companies see that you're uncovering, well, actually, before I get to that, how do you define traditional versus non-traditional?
Yeah, it's a bit of a hand-wavy definition, if I'm honest, but sort of the bar is, would a recruiter at a top company reach out to this person on LinkedIn? Or would a recruiter kind of accept this person? So what it really means is, there's a list of like 20, 30 companies and a list of like 20 or so universities. And do they have one of those on their resume or not?
Mm-hmm. Right. And some of these companies, what is their reaction when they find out that, whoa, we would have never considered Alan for this role. He doesn't have a CS degree. He only went to Binghamton or something like that. I would imagine there's a mixed reaction. Like, what are some of the reactions of customers when they see that, shit, we lost out on this hidden gem?
To their credit, it generally forces an internal discussion about what they could have done differently. Like when they see that, a lot of the time they're excited because it means, like, I really think fervently our customers all want to do the right thing, and doing the right thing here is hard because you're operating on such limited info and you have to make quick decisions. But when it happens, it's an opportunity to re-examine parts of their process. Unfortunately, I don't think there's much they can do, right? I don't think it's their fault. I actually, years ago, I did a study. When I say study, it's, a little fast and loose. It was like a little experiment, not something that was actually academic. But I took a bunch of resumes from candidates that I had worked with back when I was a recruiter, and I anonymized them. And I put them on the internet, and I asked a bunch of recruiters and hiring managers and individual contributor engineers who did interviews, just look at this resume and answer one question. Would you bring this person in for an interview? And, all of these candidates, I knew who the strong ones were, and that's not perfect. Like, of course, there's some, maybe I made a mistake, but nobody could really identify who the strong candidates were. But the really interesting part of this is that everybody disagreed with everybody else about what a strong candidate looked like once you anonymized their resumes. And hiring managers were no better at this than recruiters or engineers or any of that, right? I thought recruiters would be terrible at this task and engineers would be great. That was my bias coming into this experiment. Totally wrong. Everybody was basically flipping coins and the whole thing was a mess.
What did you anonymize? Their name? Or what else did you anonymize?
Mm-hmm. I want to say I left the companies on. I can actually look real quick at an example of an anonymized resume because I have this on my blog. One sec, I'm actually going to answer you honestly. Yeah, so I left on everything except name, contact info, and the dates where they were. So I can link you to this post.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. If you want to send that to me, we'll put it in the show notes. But okay, cool. So what other biases do you see in the system, and what other unfair aspects? Like this is something that you're trying to address. Are there other biases and unfair practices that you have not been able to? And while you've potentially solved this, there's still, it's not solved, but it sounds like you're making better inroads here. Are there areas where you're kind of like, this is unfair and I don't know how to address it yet?
Well, I'll talk about one thing that I think another bias that is a little more, it's not even really a bias, it's just an inequity in the system. And I think we've made good headway in solving that. And then I'll think about the other things that we haven't solved. So a lot of people talk about bias at the top of the funnel. So things around names on resumes, right? Race, gender, pedigree, like all of these things. And that's true. That's a problem. But let's say somebody even gets in the door. There's a whole other issue, and that is what we call the technical interview practice gap. So let's say you didn't go to a top tier computer science university. Chances are you have not been exposed to technical interview prep. And, I went to MIT for undergrad, right? We had this whole class. There's this winter break, like month-long winter break, and you could just do whatever you wanted. And if you were motivated, you could take a month-long class about how to get better at technical interviews. And that was on top of your algorithms class and a bunch of other preparation. If you go to a school that doesn't have that, you're going to be at a huge disadvantage, not because you're any less smart, but because you just don't know what to expect.
Right.
So, one of the things that I've seen, right, is, Google has done a lot of great work in trying to do outreach to HBCUs. And they've gone, and there was an article in Bloomberg about this, right? They'll go and then they'll interview like everybody, and then people won't pass their interviews, and then they'll throw up their hands and say, we tried. Well, yeah, I mean, you need to get people in on a level playing field before you start evaluating them. And, to their credit, right, companies like Google do some info sessions and, try to tell people what to expect. But these interviews are really, really hard. And it takes months of practice, even for people that know what they're doing, to be able to pass them. One info session with 30 other students where they tell you to study hash tables or whatever is not going to do it. And people are coming into these interview processes at such different levels that evaluating them is it's not fair. It just perpetuates a lot of our biases instead of solving the problem. And if you're going to do this right, you have kind of an ethical responsibility to make sure that everybody is prepared, because these interviews are 100% a learned skill. And not only are they a learned skill, but people that have been socialized around this, where their friends are all doing technical interviews at the same time, they know that the outcomes of these interviews are not a death sentence, right? If you do this enough and your friends are all doing it, after a while, you realize that it's a numbers game. And okay, maybe I screwed up my Google interview. Okay, no problem. I'm going to go interview at Facebook. And if I just keep banging on it, eventually I'm going to get it. But if you don't know that and you haven't internalized that it's a numbers game, you could have one bad interview and you can say, well, I guess I'm not meant to be an engineer. And then you quit.
Yep. So a couple of questions here. So we still live in an imperfect world, like very imperfect. Every day we see more imperfection with that. And you're trying to rectify that. And you have some forward-looking companies that are starting to test this with you. But the vast majority have not done this. Mm-hmm. So if you're an individual and you're trying to stand out and get considered, there were two biases that you talked about. One, like not being anonymized. So the opposite of anonymized is like people will see what your profile looks like on LinkedIn before you join. So and the second one is on the preparation. So first, if people know what I look like on LinkedIn and they know what schools I went to and they know what companies I worked at, how do I take control of what can I do to fight those biases? As an individual that's trying to get a job at Google or Twilio or Asana or whatever.
Yeah. Well, there are two things. So every job search, as you pointed out, has two challenges. One is getting your foot in the door in the first place. And then the second one is, once you do have your foot in the door, doing well in your interviews. And the two take a really different set of skills. And you have to be good at both. So I'm sure you're telling your students this on a regular basis, but getting your foot in the door is a sales funnel. You're basically a door-to-door salesman, right? And you've got to bang on a lot of doors. I hate that. This is what we're trying to fix. And you're right. We have some forward-looking, we have like 30 companies hiring through us. Over the next year, we're trying to make it a lot more, but we're not going to be the magic pill. And honestly, a lot of our companies aren't hiring juniors through us because they have enough of a junior engineering pipeline without our help, even though we've tried to give it to them for free and all these other things. It's just not worked out. So you need to, what I always tell people is, if you don't know somebody there, then don't reach out to recruiters, especially if you're junior, because they're not incentivized to help you. They don't need help getting junior engineers. And with their university recruiting program and just all the applications they're getting, they're fine. Reach out to a hiring manager there, right? If it's a smaller startup, then maybe even a founder, right? I get emails. I answer every email that comes to me about hiring, every single one, because the struggle is real and I get it. I get what it's like to be on the other side of that. But if it's a really big company, find an engineering manager. Don't contact them on LinkedIn, because they're not looking on LinkedIn because they're getting spammed by recruiters nonstop. So find their email. Their email is usually easy to find. It's probably, if it's a smaller company, it's their first name at the company domain. If it's a bigger company, maybe it's their first name, last name, but you can use tools. There's a really great email lookup tool called Rocket Reach, where you can put in the URL of somebody's LinkedIn and it will actually give you their email. And it's cheap. I don't know. It's like a penny per request. I don't know. I'm making that up. Whatever it is, it's cheap even for a job seeker. And it's an excellent tool. So send them an email and have that email Like, don't have it be a cover letter, right? Dear sir, madam, I am excited about blah, blah, blah. Like, please don't write that. Instead, write something concise about the work they're doing and about something that you've done. And, maybe just ask them for advice, but don't make them read a lot and sound earnest. And, if you've built something cool, put it in there, because that validates it. Like, people want to help people, but they want to help people that, can help themselves. So project yourself as somebody that is worth helping because you've already done things and you've taken initiative. And you're going to have to do that a bunch. Like, you're going to find 100 of these and just send them out, and they're going to bite, and they're going to be like, oh, okay, like, let me introduce you to this person. And then you're going to get pinballed around a little bit, and it's going to work out, but it might take months. And what sucks about this is, while you're doing this, you also, at any moment, you might be invited for interviews. And then you have to be ready to do well in those. One mistake, actually, that I see a lot of people make, regardless of how experienced they are, is they'll get an opportunity to interview. And then, even if they're not ready, they won't push back and say, oh, thank you so much. Let's schedule this for a few months out. It's actually totally okay to do that. Recruiters, once they're scheduling you, they want you to succeed. And when they contact you, is completely arbitrary, and they don't care when you interview. Like, these roles are always open. So, like, be your own agent and set yourself up to success. It's perfectly okay to ask for more time. But once that happens, you need to start preparing. And there, Interviewing IO, I don't want to plug the hell out of my product, but this is literally like all we do is we prepare people for technical interviews. You get mentorship, you get feedback, you do a few of these. We now have we have a thing now where you don't have to pay us anything for practice until you get a job. And if you don't get a job, you just never pay. And it's, it's either $500 or $1,000, depending on how many interviews you want. Once you get a job, it's not that much money. Before you get a job, it is.
Yeah.
So use us once you feel like you're at the point where you're going to get interviews, and it's going to take probably 5 or 10 practice interviews before you're ready, and a lot of studying in between, but then you're set.
And I just want to clarify for the listeners out there, the engineering recruiting process has some very different attributes than the non-engineering place, because I generally tell people, when you get an interview, you take the interview, because these roles, like you're talking about, a lot of evergreen roles. These companies are just sucking up engineers, level 3s, level 4s, and they're plugging them into the machine.
The matrix,
But everything else I fundamentally agree with there. And a big part was on the outreach of reaching out, and because we live in a world where it's what you know or who you know has a large impact. You need to take control and try to improve your surface area of luck of who you know, because they may be able to help you going forward. So, and then on the second piece, you mentioned another great thing so one is how you improve yourself on getting noticed. And that was really sick advice. It was build your network. And then the next piece of sick advice that you offered was train. And interviewing IO is a great opportunity for there. And it amazes me it doesn't amaze me all the time because I'm used to it now. But to your point about that story you talked about, Google interviewing at HBCUs and historical Black colleges and universities. It's you went to MIT and they taught you how to practice for technical interviews. I spent $138,000 for my MBA at Columbia, and that's the first time I learned about behavioral based interviewing. It's not like I couldn't have figured that out elsewhere. And I learned about negotiation, which has helped me earn money. And they did mock interviews of me and they gave their feedback, but not everybody has that privilege or opportunity. So are there other biases so we talked a little bit about not knowing, not having the connections. We talked about not only not being prepared, but not knowing how to prepare or what to prepare. There's no guidebook. You could Google it if you thought about it. You can say, hey, how do I interview for a job, like a tech job, like an engineering job at Facebook? But you probably get so much stuff that comes out there, it'd be hard to discern it. So interviewing IO is a great resource. Are there other good resources that you recommend for people on how to improve their chances, A, of getting noticed to get to the first conversation, and B, getting the job? Like, are there some resources or recommendations or suggestions that you have for people besides interviewing IO? Sounds awesome. It's
yeah.
really,
Well, we're
really
certainly
job.
we're part of a strategy. We're not the whole strategy. Thank you for saying that. I'm sure all of your engineering listeners know about LeetCode, but I'll say it maybe because there's one person that doesn't, and for that person, this will be extremely helpful and
what's it called? Because now I can
Yeah, Leet, Leet code. So I'll probably do them a disservice by distilling what they do, but it's like this repository of interview questions. So you can say, show me, and they're sorted by difficulty level, right? And these are exactly the kinds of questions that you're going to get in real technical interviews at top companies. So what a lot of our users do is they will start practicing by themselves. So you can get these questions and then you have to code them up yourself. So there isn't a human. But then it will actually grade you. So you write code and it'll see if your code runs correctly. And this is, if you aren't experienced with these interviews before you start mock interviewing with a human, it's a really, really good idea to spend some time on the site, because before you can do it in front of somebody else, it's a good idea to see if you can do it yourself without somebody breathing down your neck.
Yeah.
That said, one mistake that I see a lot of people make is they get comfortable on LeetCode and then they keep grinding on it past the point of diminishing returns. Because interviewing with a human is different than writing code by yourself. You have to explain what you're thinking. You have to communicate about, potential different solutions and trade-offs and explain, what your code does and what it doesn't do. And also just when someone's watching you, it's a lot more stressful. So I think once you get to the point where you're solving like LeetCode easy, medium questions, it's probably good to switch over to practicing with a human. But there are other sites like that too. There's another one called Interview Cake, and that one has a good set of problems. They will also give you hints as you go, so you can sort of build up your skill set if you're not familiar with these kinds of problems. And then there are books. Let me actually look up the name of, I'll have to send it to you. It's called Grokking something.
Okay. You can follow up and we'll put in the show notes.
Yeah, cool. Sounds good. So that book is terrific. And yeah, that's all I can think of off the top of my head.
Awesome.
Oh, one other thing, actually. This is also like something that people often mess up and don't know, especially for a company like Amazon, right? And this is kind of specific to them. They have a behavioral interview as part of their process called leadership principle. To people that are inexperienced with this kind of interview, they might think, oh, it's just me talking about my past projects. That's easy. A lot of people end up not getting offers because they didn't do well on this part, because they're expecting you to talk about your past projects in a very specific way.
Yep.
So I just want to call that out. Like, that is worth, even though like sometimes people think behavioral interviews are the ugly stepsister of technical interviews. They're easy. It's a formality. It's actually not. And it is the reason that a lot of people who would have succeeded end up tripping.
Yep. Yeah. Behavioral based interviewing. In the world that I work, that is the meat and potatoes. And there's lots of biases and issues with behavioral based interviewing. And there's ways that you can figure out how to answer those too with the STAR method: situation, task, action, and result. But again, it comes back to the training. And it also comes back to, first, you have to be considered, which is either your resume is unblinded. So you need to have some big logos on there or big schools on there that get someone's attention, or you need to use the referrals to get in to be considered. And then you need to train, whether it's on technical side with interviewing IO or behavioral based interviewing. You got to be prepared for that. And I think that's the sickest advice that we can offer here is get noticed. And then when you get noticed, be prepared to do it effectively.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. So there are these sites that teach people how to answer the questions. So it's all this information is Googleable or like learnable. And yet these organizations are not hiring people that can learn, because if people can learn to ace the interview, they don't really need to know the information on the job, because they can just always rely on Google, or as long as they know how to search for the answer, then they can do the job. But we get back to like a situation where people think that they have to answer questions on the fly to be effective. There are people that think differently, that interpret things differently, that maybe can't do it, or they don't handle pressure well, which is not a real life situation. When I get questions at work of, oh, how are you going to launch this new product? It's not like I need to answer it in 3 minutes without asking other people for their opinions. and get feedback.
I think that's right. And that is one of those problems that we're not fixing, and I really hope we can fix in the future. Like, I hate the format of a lot of these interviews, but that's a whole other rabbit hole that we don't have to go down today.
And I love what you're doing. And there's a lot of organizations that are trying to encourage these large organizations that are controlling the decision-making process for interviewing and hiring. I love what you're trying to do there. What I've seen is just a hesitancy to change things because of inertia, because that's how we do it here.
Yep.
And because of that, like, I'm taking a different approach. I'm not saying one's better than the other. I think they're both really important, but we live in a world where there are not blinded resumes. You know the color of someone's skin through LinkedIn. You know their name, or if you can't pronounce it, and we know that there are biases that exist there. So knowing that, to the extent that you can take control, build those referrals, and and I think you offered some really great advice there about reach out to a lot of people and have a lot of conversations, and then train and prepare. So awesome. We're running low on time now. You've had an amazing career, and I just want to go back to one thing quickly, because you've been all technical. You've been an IC engineer. You've been a hiring manager for engineering. Now you're an entrepreneur in engineering, and then you took this little detour as a chef. So how do you get into that? How do you make that right-hand turn from a software engineer at Acme to a professional cook?
Yeah, I was an intern at Akamai, so that, I think, like, that, although I was there for, like, they took me back, and, like, I was there for a few years while I was in school, so maybe it counts. So I'll say that was a real engineering job, but I don't know, like, I didn't know what I wanted to do when I graduated from college, and I was kind of burned out, and I saw all of my friends either going to graduate school or to get a PhD, or going to medical school, or going to law school, or going into management consulting, and I didn't want to do any of those things, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I was kind of sick of writing code. Like, I knew long-term that's not what I'd want to do in my life, even though it was useful. It was a useful skill to have. So I was like, I'm going to try this now. I had saved some money, from doing a few entrepreneurial things in school. So I had a little bit of personal runway, and I'm like, this is the time to make risky decisions when I'm like 22. So I had no cooking experience. Like, I had just watched a lot of Food Network. And I'd read some books, and I basically got on Craigslist, which is how you found jobs at the time, a long, long time ago, and applied to every single restaurant in New York, which is where I moved after college. Like, every single, and I was like, I'll work for free, whatever, just take me on. And I was very surprised when I got so many rejections, or people just didn't answer me. And finally one answered me, and it was actually this, like, raw vegan restaurant by Gramercy in Manhattan. And I came in, and the head chef was very, very kind, and actually said, all right, look, we can't pay you right now, but I will teach you things. And he taught me how to hold a knife. And you can imagine, in a raw vegan restaurant, a lot of the work was just chopping vegetables. So I got pretty good at chopping vegetables. And after, 3 days, they're like, okay, I guess we can pay you something. And I was like, thanks. And, I ended up moving on, and I tried to make every restaurant I worked at sort of more prestigious than the previous one. I ended up working in a few places with Michelin stars, and got, I was never that great at it. And after 3 years, I'd basically run out of money and realized that I would probably never be a celebrity chef. So I was like, okay, time to do something else. But that experience was invaluable because it taught me stress management in a way that, like, nothing else has. Like, to this day, nothing that I've ever done has been as stressful as standing on a line and having plates be thrown at you. So that was kind of a grounding thing to have happen. But I think even more importantly, it changed how I looked at hiring, and that informed the rest of my career later. So in a restaurant, when you want to get a job, they don't really care what your resume looks like. They certainly don't care about your hopes and dreams or your feelings or anything. They're like, okay, come in the morning, bring your knives, and you're going to work for a day. So you come in, they watch you chop stuff, then they show you, you're kind of on a station. So they're like, these are the dishes that are on the station, prep all the food, and then at service, you're actually going to be doing the dishes, and we're going to be observing you. And then they watch you. And if you work the station successfully, at the end of the night, they feed you dinner, and then they make you an offer. And if you don't, then maybe they feed you if they feel sorry for you, maybe not, right? And then they send you home. And I just thought there was so much honor in something like that. And it was so different than anything I had seen before. And it really stuck with me, and it made me want to replicate that in other areas.
Wow. So it's a pretty tough interview. You have to cook all that time. You don't even get free dinner.
Yeah. It's pretty brutal.
Awesome. Well, you left us with some great advice. Any additional advice? And you've had an amazing career, but if you look back on your time from becoming a chef to being engineer to hiring and now a CEO, what advice would you tell yourself maybe 10, 15 years ago?
I think that so I'm trying to think I actually I'm happy that I did what I did, and I'm happy that I had this sort of meandery journey and got to do a lot of things and got to have a lot of fun doing it. But the one thing that I regret, and this is the thing I would give myself advice about, is when I had the idea for interviewing IO, I kind of sat on it for a long time because I had a recruiting business and it was very lucrative, and I couldn't find a co-founder easily. And I knew the idea was good because I tested it by putting up a really ugly marketing site and then throwing that on Hacker News saying, get anonymous interview practice with engineers from top companies. And in a day, we got 7,000 signups, and it was top of Hacker News for a day and a half. So I'm like, okay, shit, there's something here. And then I just kind of and I didn't have a product, right? It was just me trying to validate the idea. I should have just started working on it the next day. I should have sat down and hustled up somebody to help me code it because, I didn't want to do it all myself. I had other things I needed to be doing for the business. But instead, I spent sort of months trying to convince a friend to quit his job and, this and that and making excuses. And I just want to shake past Aline and be like, what the hell were you doing? You were sitting on this thing and you could have had a head start. I think things worked out okay for us, but it was a harder journey, I think, than it needed to be.
Yeah, so maybe just take a little quicker action once you have some conviction, and you also had data as well.
Yeah, or just just jump in with stuff and do it earnestly, and then quit when if it's clearly not working, walk away. But just get in there quickly, move quickly.
Move quickly, hustle. It's important in so many aspects of life, including the job search, including entrepreneurship and everything. Don't just stand around.
All right, apologies if your ears are bleeding from the potty mouth, but wow, that was a great interview. Big thanks to Aline for her time with Alan on the show today. That wraps up another amazing episode of the Sick Career Podcast with Alan Stein. Please check out past episodes and other resources on the website at sickpodcast.com. That's SYCK. And Alan, would you say it's a great idea to subscribe to the Kadima Accelerator newsletter?
It is the greatest idea to subscribe to that, Russ. The Accelerator, spelled XLR8R, is our weekly newsletter where we share tips and guidance about how to accelerate your career, how to take ownership of your career. Plus, there's really cute pictures of Coco and Tootsie, and I highly appreciate and welcome people to send in their pets. Not their pets. I think that's illegal.
Don't send the dog.
But send in their pictures of their pets to me, and we will feature them in future Accelerator newsletters.
So when I get the newsletter, and one of the things I really like is how you have the XLR8R as a New York license plate. Is that a real tag?
It is. I do not pay for vanity plates because I'm too cheap of a bastard. but I think you can I may actually buy a fake Accelerator nameplate, which I think you can get for $18 on Amazon rather than pay, $75 a year for the vanity plate.
There you go. For your host, Alan Stein, I'm Russ Reba. We hope you've enjoyed the Aline Lerner episode, and you're going to love the next one.